Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, things are continuing to ramp up over the last week when it comes to EVE Online. So I managed to make my way into Turner when the Star had its extreme event. It was pretty cool, although pretty small in scope. Looking back at it, I think a lot of us would have hoped for a little bit more. They were up to, I saw like over 1900 players in the system. I actually saw that there were a lot of other people streaming, making videos and things like that. So it was pretty cool, but I didn't feel the need to add even more video or streaming or anything like that. It was cool to just be a participant and a viewer basically of what was happening. I kind of feel like CCP could have taking it a little bit further, for instance destroying some ships. I was in a small stealth bomber, probably should not have survived that explosion considering what happened to the planet, to a station and to other structures. But alright, they chose to leave us in like 20% structure, and then what I feel is like they maybe reactivated the gates a little bit too soon. I think there they could have been like, alright, it's gonna take us until our next downtime to get the gates back online, so those 2,000 people that decided to go and take a look, ignored all the warnings about the potential danger there. You're in a Thunderdome for the next, what would it have been, 17 hours or so. Have fun either finding a way out through the wormholes, destroying yourself, or, well, trying to survive for a day in that system. But they chose to go the rather tepid route, I would say, which can also be understood if there's like lots of new players there. They don't want to basically force them into anything due to an event which was probably more of an introduction to stuff is happening rather than here it is, the full storyline is developed, because I personally did hope that maybe another enemy would show up, or maybe like one of those Triglavian arcs would all of a sudden materialize as the star exploded or something like that. But no, it feels like it's more of a teaser as to more that's being planned, because there was a new scope video as well where basically we know that the Minmatar have two other of these transmuters in hands, and then the question becomes, what are they going to decide to do? The Amar say they've got a lot of data, everything that they need, so what's that all about? And then all of the wormholes that show up as well. So I think they've got a storyline ready, and that this was basically just a kickoff event and not necessarily the whole enchilada. On the news for the expansion, right, CCPA also released an article on their changes to security status. Alpha clones will no longer be able to gank in HiSec, because they won't be able to change their security status for ships, so they can't break the law anymore, basically. And then on the other hand, what they're also going to do is for abyssal runners, they'll have to take a little bit more risk. No more abyssal running from JITA or 1.0 systems, and then as you go into higher tiers and then you want to do that in safer space, you'll have a flag. And so overall I think pretty balanced changes focused on what we know CCP wants to focus on, which is to make it a little bit better for newer players, right? Griefing and things like that can be quite daunting here in EVE Online when all of a sudden a very cheap catalyst blows up the ship that you've been working a week on, while at the same time for the high-end players trying to make it a little bit tougher for those that are making absolute enormous amounts of ISK from their abyssal running, so not necessarily a part of the sandbox. But we'll see how all of that evolves. There's definitely a lot happening and a lot that will change with the expansion that should be coming next week. Let's also take a quick look at the new Eden store, see what's happening over here. So we get a sale on Omega, all right, 13% off for a month. And then I think there's like even more of a sale on top of the normal discount for like 6 months, 3 months. So you actually have a bit of a sale happening here, which could push up demand for Plex a little bit, which could explain how we managed to make our way above 5 million ISK. And then of course with Halloween, we've got our Halloween themed skins that are front and center here as well. So on the services tab, yeah, we get a sale happening for the New Eden store for your Omega time. Let's go into the market itself then, and we'll start with pilot services. That's coming in at 5 minutes. There we go. Let's get started. Here is the Plex chart. So you can see volumes picked up on the sale. It's not as big a sale as what we've seen here probably in late September. That pushed us up to 5.5 million. But you can see the spread has basically increased a little bit on that extra supply. And as a result, in GDA itself, we're above 5 million for the sellers. But the buyers are sticking around at 4.75 million. Slight margin opening up. It's really still not a lot. And then around GDA, Tranquility Trading Tower, you can expect some slightly more aggressive selling. There is potentially an advantage in taxes there to the trading here, and you can see 3,000 of them could be a purchase that is being turned into ISK right away. Same thing with the sellers, the buyers, excuse me, going up to above 4.8 million, willing to grab Plex below 5 million and seeing that as a good deal. I personally would wait it out a little bit. I do think that there were our first signs of some peaking happening as we closed in on 5 million over the last couple of weeks. So now a sale is basically making prices extra expensive, but I do think that a bit of a spread might be opening up here as well. We'll see how everything works out. Multiple pilot train certificate continuing this slow increase in price. So that's coming in at 1.9 billion for the sellers and above 1.8 for the buyers as well. Basically both of them, right? Max prices slowly edging up, minimum prices slowly edging up as well on pretty low volumes, but the upwards pressure to catch up to everything that's happening with Plex is still ongoing. Skill extractors then had a bit of a volume bump slightly before Plex. Yep, there we go. Which actually drove the prices down. So that was probably not a sell that would increase demand potentially, right? Like an Omega sale. And so you get the exact reverse, while Plex becomes in high demand because you can turn it into subscription time pretty easily or more cheaply. For skill extractors, of course, they become cheaper to purchase for real life money, so more supply, bringing the price back down, and basically we are going back up now as Plex are going up as well once again. So we get a bit of a disconnect due to the timing of the sales between these two items. I think both of them will start to move in unison at this point, unless of course CCP continues with a lot of sales. Impact on the injectors, that's going to be a difficult one then, because we're basically pulling at both ends, and alright, well, we're not really going anywhere here either, which to me is an indication that maybe if we can absorb this Plex sale now, or this Omega time sale now, we could be in for a different market, especially with the expansion, maybe some players coming back, increasing supply a little bit. We'll see how everything goes, of course, but we're basically stuck at that 900 million mark. We're not able to just push up like crazy from here. 940 million for the sellers, 900 million for the first buyer though, pushing down to 890 pretty quickly. But yeah, a little bit of aggressive buying is starting to come in here, and 1 billion coming into view at the front page is not that great, but for the last month or so we have basically been stuck within this range. Where will we go from here? Again, I think the expansion itself will actually be pretty important there. For the small scale injectors, we basically have something similar, except one dip in October, but you can see over the last month, basically flat at the current range, which would be, it's probably going to be a 190, no, 185 actually, look at that, 186 for the sellers, 173 for the buyers, 200 million almost into view though, on the front page as well for the small scale injectors. So a supply side problem might be here due to the low activity that we've just gone through with the summertime, and again the expansion I think will be a potential turnover for the market, but not necessarily, of course. If the expansion doesn't bring in a lot of extra interest, we could be in this current situation for the foreseeable future, and then I think inflationary forces will start to take up the general trajectories as well. For the daily alpha injector, we got our sale that has brought us back in line with what we would expect. So a CCP intervention, the third one in this last year. That's very visible here on the chart. You can see those volumes. That is CCP coming in with a pretty chunky sale for those daily alpha injectors. Of course, we had this extreme reaction here, up to 70 million on the increased real-life costs for these pilot services, but CCP brought the daily alpha injectors back below 50 million. Here's 49 million for the sellers, 43 million for the buyers, and this to me actually tells me that it could be worth it for those people that make these daily alpha injectors part of their game cycle, to try and build up a little bit of a reserve, because you can see that CCP will tolerate higher prices for a little bit, but month, 2 months in, they will then come in with a sale, and your 50 million a day can be your standard your standard goal, if you can have some days where you can, for instance, earn a couple hundred million, be lucky in an exploration drop or something like that, and turn that into daily alpha injectors when they're below 50 million, so that you can weather storms like these, because it's probably just gonna get worse and worse at the moment, as the real life prices, of course, are what they are. And then finally we've got the hypercores, which is continuing, actually, if you look at it over the last 2 months and over the last 1 month or so, continuing a slow increased price, although it is a little bit of a bumpy ride over the last 2 months here, due to, of course, the plex sale here, for instance, that then rippled through to the hypercore market. But the general trend, I do think, is and will remain inflationary in EVE Online, because more ISK can generally be made than be sunk into out of the economy. Of course, lower player activity and things like that play a role as well. I quickly went through the Reddit thread on the monthly economic numbers. Haven't taken a look at those myself, but looks like nullsec is really starting to get used to those reserve banks. And if I'm not mistaken, CCP actually will also make all ISK creation through ratting in nullsec available through that reserve bank system. So it should just be more ISK flowing into the game that way. 535,000 for the sellers, 500,000 for the buyers. Definitely close to a 1-year high point, if we can disregard the spike that was due to the crazy plex sales that happened in September. So overall, for these pilot services, still seeing upwards pressure in a lot of regions, but also maybe a little bit of hesitation here and there. Unfortunately, CCP coming in with another Omega sale is now skewing the numbers a little bit, in my opinion. Next up, we have the minerals coming in at 12.45. Like that. As always, we will start with titanium, and we already have seen that on the ticker, but stuff is starting to move, and it's not very good news for those high-sec miners. Here is titanium going back down towards the lowest end of the range for the entire year at 368 for the sellers. That definitely took a little bit of a beating. 358 for the buyers. I would say the good news is, if you look at these volumes, 100 million, 200 million, one at 500 million, here at 380 almost, we can push back up pretty quickly. We need to get to 399 before we see 1 billion and plus units coming in on a single sell order, but there's definitely a bit of sell pressure that has pushed the prices of titanium down quite considerably. The good news, it's not on that much volume. A little bit of interest, maybe some faction dreadnought or something like that could absorb that volume pretty quickly, but at the moment, titanium just took a pretty severe beating. If you want to sell right now, you're looking at a very discounted price. Pyrite then doing a little bit of an opposite move, but was basically at the low end of its trade range as well for the last month or so. A little bit of a bump, but I think new supply is already taking advantage of that. 887, still nothing that great, and an 875 for the buyers. Very narrow margin, but we're still selling pyrite below 9 ISK, and of course we would love to get back to 10 ISK or something like that for us to unload the pyrite, which at the moment I'm basically gathering and not selling. And then finally, we've got our Mexalon market that is slowly landing on 70 ISK, which is actually pretty good on this 1-year chart. So here we're still looking quite nice at 74 for the sellers, 70 plus for the buyers is definitely very nice as well. So for those people that are mining in HiSec, the story is still the same. Focus on Mexalon. Both pyrite and titanium are clearly not doing that well. Probably a different story in LowSec. Here is the Isogen chart that now has a very strange minimum maximum, but you could already tell, I think, that we are continuing to climb. Look at that, another step up. Trying to find the correct range for Isogen is not easy, of course, especially also with all the changes. Maybe faction warfare systems will draw in more activity, but also more danger around potential low-sec mining sites, and so we are pushing towards 500 ISK, not there just yet, but 473 to 4 for the sellers and 440 ISK for the buyers. There's definitely a bit of a readjustment happening. Look at the volumes here as well, much more in line with what I would eventually expect this to look like. Below 10 million, a couple of exceptions here at 17 million, but definitely volumes in the millions rather than the tens of millions here, like 70 million that's waiting at 496. That's there for another 26 days, so that's gonna keep us from pushing up above that 500 ISK as well, but it's coming into play. So again, reserves are maybe drying out, or maybe people are learning that keeping some powder dry always does make sense, and don't spook the market too much with huge volumes. And now we have this over the course of the last 3 weeks or so, a really double readjustment, pushing through that 400 ISK barrier, which was very difficult over the last couple of months. I think if you follow Eve Talk, you know that was because of one very big sell order of a lot of units. I think it was like 700 million. I'm not even sure what it was anymore. That was keeping us in check. Once that one was gone, we broke through pretty easily, and now we are actually at a second step heading for 500 ISK for Isogen. Pretty good news, of course, for those that do have the patience. And then for Noxium, a little bit of a different story here. I felt like we could maybe partly see a change in the low-sec mining landscape, because it took Isogen breaking or really bumping up through the 400 ISK was only after Noxium basically made its way back from below 750 to 1000 ISK, but it looks like that is easily absorbed and that volumes are coming in to bring us back down, not to 750 just yet, but we are talking 880 for the sellers, 820 for the buyers. So here we do have a decently supplied Noxium that's actually pushing prices down a little bit. And then here on the volumes, if we disregard those two sell orders at 10 million units, this is much more in line with what you would expect to be a step down from the Isogen numbers, struggling to get over 1 to 2 million, and a lot of sell orders that just push just below a million. So the Isogen volumes are in the millions for most sellers. Noxium gets to below the millions for most sellers. Definitely a very, very different landscape than what we're seeing in HiSec at the moment, and I think we're getting closer and closer to that active supply demand, where you can then also expect stuff like this to be part of the course of. So of course you have a market that will then move depending on what happens in the game in general. Supply goes down, prices go up, maybe demand goes up, prices can go up as well, but you won't, we're very likely to leave this era behind, where basically prices are stuck below 400 ISK, because there's a couple billion units that's ready and waiting from, well, basically legacy activity in the game. This does start to feel a little bit different. And then for nullsec, I'm not exactly sure what's happening here, but looks like they're able to push prices towards 3000 ISK. Here is Zydrine losing a little bit over the last week, but of course coming from a crazy 3x on the 1 year chart. 3000 ISK for the sellers, and now we're down to 2855 to 631, so a little bit of margin as well, maybe a little bit too much too quickly here, but in general, of course, super expensive. And then Megasite, you may already have seen that from the ticker as well, is basically also pushing to that high point and easily maintaining that plateau, a pattern that we don't see very often. But yeah, the last 10 days or so were basically flat at a range of 2950, buyers coming in at 2680, still a bit of margin there. 300 ISK is a decently significant margin for this price range, but you can very clearly see that it's slightly different from a lot of the other materials, because this needs to be imported from mostly nullsec, and as a result our sellers do dictate a price, and they're going towards 3000 ISK for their minerals. Extremely expensive. And then is Morphite signaling that it's because there's not enough mining happening there? I would say absolutely not. Here we go this week, bringing us back down to 40,000 ISK. That should mean ample supplies, 41 for the sellers, and buyers below 40k at 39,000. Haven't seen that in a while, so this is an indication that there's still plenty of mining activity being done and possible in nullsec. So it must be, I think, a demand side thing, where there is a bit of an arms race happening. I think in those larger ships, people are prepping maybe as well for those faction dreadnoughts. From what I've read, they are actually potentially going to be very powerful, destructive for their price, despite the fact that they're faction ships, so they will require some extra hoops, but it should be very interesting and should potentially be something that the nullsec powers will race for. Alright, moving on to the PI market at 2050. Let's see here, but as I've just mentioned here, when it comes to the minerals, I'm expecting basically a continuation of strong demand for the construction of larger ships, and maybe not that much new supply at the moment, considering what we saw in the pilot services, and thus I think we will still see pretty high prices. Now, broadcast nodes does lose a little bit, and this is exactly what I was saying, where, for instance, a very unusual sight here to see Megasite spike up and then start to plateau at that 1 year high range. For broadcast nodes, doesn't necessarily come only from nullsec. People can make that all over New Eden. You have a different story. This very high price when we went at 2.5 million is so juicy that plenty of supplies come into play and bring us back down to 2 million for the sellers and still 1.9 million for the buyers, showcasing that very strong demand. Definitely highest range for the year, not necessarily the best price. That was last week. For our construction blocks, we are losing a little bit of ground, getting back below 10,000 ISK at 9.5 for one seller, but it is practically 10,000 for most sellers. 8.9 for the buyers though. That's definitely a bit of margin that's opened up here in the construction blocks, showing that maybe demand will not remain all that strong. Although again, my expectation with the expansion and those faction dreadnoughts is that we will see pretty strong demand stay here. Coolant's also losing a little bit more ground, landing on 10,000 ISK, 10.5 to 10k. That's more of a margin where you do have strong demand, but the numbers here are maybe a bit worrying. We can't exactly browse amongst the buyers anymore in Jeddah and around Jeddah. So another sign that maybe at the low end of the materials, a little bit less demand is popping up here. Then we've got our enriched uranium. A bit of a mixed story here, of course, pushing in early October to 15,000 ISK, 50% more than a normal refined PI material price, 1 year high point. Obviously, that is going to create a bit of a response, and we'll need to pull back from that a little bit. But now, for the last almost month, we have been going down pretty straight, and it's only now that 5-day moving average is starting to show the first signs of slowing down. That's at 12,400 ISK, 12,000 for the buyers. Strong demand, yes, but definitely a pretty large pullback here in the price after we got that first spike. Integrity response drones then, another one that's maybe showing you the first signs of something changing in the PI market dynamic. We are now below 2.5 million, and a big volume spike here actually did not push the prices up for a very long time. Nope. easily absorbed by the market. 2.4 for the sellers, 2.3 for the market for the buyers, which is still a very, very good price, of course, for an advanced PI material, one of the most expensive that there is. But it does feel like maybe there is not as much demand anymore in the market right now. Again, the expansion could change all of that, but a bit of pressure here is starting to show up in a lot of these. Same story with the mechanical parts, going to just below 10,000 for the average prices, 10.5 to 9.8. Not that much of a margin, but I think a little bit more than over the last week. And clearly buyers below 10,000 ISK is something that is not part for the course for most of last month. Miniature electronics next. Yeah, sort of the same story. If we now look at the 5-day moving average and would draw a straight line, or just look at the 20-day moving average, basically a little bit of pressure over the last couple of months as well. 12,400, that's still great. 11,780, that's still pretty narrow margin and strong demand, but a slight feeling of pressure is starting to show up here. Nano factories able to stay just below 900k. Yep, with a narrow margin, so not exactly the most volatile or exciting story here. Organic mortar applicators managed to make their way to that 900 ISK, which is actually a 1-year high point. Gives back a little bit of ground from that, but we're still talking below 900k for the sellers, 710 for those buyers though. That's definitely, I think, compared to last week, a bit of margin that has opened up here. So buyers are maybe a little bit wary here. Recursive computing modules, another nice spike that's been absorbed. Are we back below a million for the sellers? Yep, 970 to 810. Also, again, slight margin opening up here between sellers and buyers. Robotics then plateauing at 80,000 ISK, 1-year high point 82 to 79. Definitely a different story here. Very, very expensive and able to stay at this 1-year long range as well. My perspective here is that this could be a realignment that will be needed throughout the specialized PI materials, because most of what's before that, which would be, for instance, refined PI materials that are needed to make those specialized, have pushed up towards that 10,000 ISK. And historically, when the average price for our refined PI material was 10k, the price for our specialized PI materials was practically 100k as well. So I think here this may just be lagging behind because the input costs are just now really starting to materialize, and people that make robotics and things like that are starting to feel that those margins need to go back up a little bit before they continue to sell or up their production. So yeah, for specialized PI materials, I am curious to see if we will see 100k more often, and especially if robotics can then actually still build from here. From that perspective, this still has a lot of room to grow. Rocket fuel, right, back at a 1-year high point range as well, 13,000 to 12,000. So a little bit of a lack of supply all of a sudden for the market is pushing prices up. Self-harmonizing power cores was nicely plateauing above that 2.25 million, but you can see here at the tail end, daily averages starting to dip a little bit lower, 2.2 to 2.1 million though. It's one buyer. So here, after that, margin opens up ever so slightly. Smart fab units, continuing that trend that I was sort of looking for. Specialized PI material, most of the year above 50k. Sometimes we play with 75,000 ISK, but most of it pretty stable and pretty cheap. And look at what's happening at the tail end now. Sellers coming in 120,000, 78,000 for the buyers. So maybe this is really a ripple through the PI market, that whatever is needed below the smart fab unit has become a 10, 11k type of item, and then selling for 50k just doesn't make sense anymore. And so we are seeing a bit of a realignment in these. Sterile conduits continuing to climb. All right, pretty impressive actually. 1.3 million to 1.2 million, 1-year high point, or pretty much at least on a 5-day moving average. So that does happen as well. Supercomputers, specialized PI material, also building right at the tail end. 100k for the sellers, a little bit what I was predicting just a couple of items ago, but the average price not able to maintain that just yet. But that I have to be honest, right? That price for me was 100k for the sellers, not necessarily the average price for those specialized PI materials. But if sellers want to get like a normal healthy margin at the current prices for the refined PI materials, I do think that they'll push for 100k on most of these, and yeah, that means for robotics that we might still have to catch up. After that we get synthetic oil, also clearly at the high range, and this could be one of those reasons. You can see most of the year 7,500 disc was easily grabbable for that synthetic oil, and now sellers coming in at practically 10,000 disc, buyers forced up above 9,000 disc. Whatever refined this synthetic oil creates into specialized PI materials, well, their margins are either gone or they need to up their prices as well. Synthetic synapses, then of course a little bit different because it's tied to implants as well. 100k for the sellers and also 95k for the buyers. Basically an expensive specialized PI material even from a historical perspective, but not completely crazy. Transcranial microcontrollers, sellers at 100k, buyers a little bit lower here at 86k, and so our average prices are taking a bit of a dive, but last 2 months very nice high range. And our water-cooled CPU, are they confirming anything here? Well, at least they're confirming that they're away from the 4,000 to 5,000 range towards the 5,000 to 6,000 range, which also again will ripple through the economy as being more expensive. 5.7 to 5.5, narrow margin here as well, so this could continue to go up as well. And then finally the weight-wear mainframes, 1 year high point, advanced PI materials, so large ship construction, 1.9 million almost to 1.7 million, very expensive. So a slight in my opinion, slightly more mixed picture, although in general we're still very expensive in the PI materials market. Here and there you do have a bit of a pullback that looks to be demand driven, so we will see of course how all of that evolves. You guys know my expectation. I do think that the expansion and then the introduction of those faction dreadnoughts will at least temporarily push up demand for PI even more. Next up, advanced moon materials coming in at 3130. There we go, and on this perspective, although I have a couple of small advanced moon materials investments that I've already made, I think I'll be very careful, because if we look at what's happening in the minerals, sure, nullsec minerals are extremely expensive, but Morphite is showing that there should still be ample mining activity there. So if they're mining their moons, they're probably still massively supplying these advanced moon mats. Let's get started. Crystalline carbonite for Galente. Well, back above 100 disc. We've been there over the last couple of months, so 108 to 104 for the buyers. Question is this another turnaround moment, or will this easily be absorbed by new supply? We'll probably know in the next 2 weeks or so. Well, with that caveat, of course, with that one warning, the expansion drops next week, so if you absolutely want to take that gamble, last week was probably your opportunity to do so, and maybe some investors have started to move on potential moves with what happens with the expansion. So does feel like if something is going to change the advanced moon materials, it could be happening right now. For Caldari, there we go, titanium carbide back above 125, so whoa, damn, sorry there guys, misclicked, but yeah, above 125 for titanium carbide, pushing 124 now. Sellers are already coming in. 123 for the buyers though, that's definitely a little bit stronger. So I would say here, again, another one where we'll have to see a little bit more longer term if this is the start of something or if this will get crushed by supply very quickly. For Minmatar, it's Fernite carbide. That definitely feels a little bit different, pushed up to 125 very quickly, but then the drop-off seems to be pretty sharp as well, 117 to 115, slightly better demand, so interesting. interesting. And is Amar doing the same thing? Well, it made its way above 100 disc, or it never really went below 100 disc, and is already starting to plateau here as well, with 5-day moving average crossing 20-day at 115 to 110. So slight premium compared to the lowest prices for the last couple of months. But I wouldn't be sure that this is it, that we are starting to go back up for the carbides just yet. Maybe the metamaterials will give us a bit more of an idea. Let's get started with Galente, which is photonic metamaterials. Well, they're saying that this won't last very long, as photonic metamaterials just touch 1-year low points again at 6,000 disc, 6150 for the first seller, with 400,000 units as well, 6,000 for the buyer. So this is a sign that we are still massively oversupplied. What's Caldari doing? Non-linear metamaterials, same story, 1-year low point below 10k for the sellers and 9,000 disc for the buyers. Minmatar, our plasmonic metamaterials, also 1-year low point below 10,000 disc. And finally for Amar with terahertz metamaterials, slightly different story here. Actually a couple of daily averages above 11k, 10.5, 11 coming into play very quickly, but still buyers at 9,500 ISK. So in general, of course, metamaterials pointing to oversupply and 1-year low points. So we would expect from that perspective that the pressure on the carbides will mount almost immediately, and that by next week we should again see lower prices. Let's see what the other advanced move materials have to tell us. Here is fermionic condensate just stuck at its low range. Not much to say here. Ferrogel, slight bump, just like our carbides, touched 20k on a couple of days. Sellers now already below 19,000 ISK. Not a good sign if you're looking for better prices, I don't think. Fullerite did go above 700 ISK, pretty nice recovery. We're landing on 500, so maybe a slightly higher range can come into play with 502 for the buyers as well, but the pressure could be mounting and is clearly there. Hypersynaptic fibers went to 5k and is now again starting to go lower. Nano transistors 2.5 to 3k, slight wavy pattern, slightly downward trend still, so I wouldn't say I'm seeing much here. Our phenolic composites did make their way back to 1,250, which is sort of well away from the bottom at 875, but you can see that advantage was taken of these higher prices. There's the volumes that brought the prices back down to 1,000 disc, not a 1-year low point, but around 1k for phenolic composites. Pressurized oxidizers showing that same pressure as the metamaterials. Reinforced carbon fibers staying above 7.5, and then our ceramic fibers, those actually went back to that 350 range, but you can now start to see, I think, on a 20-day moving average, 5 days staying below, daily average staying below the 5-day moving average. This is clearly massively under pressure right now, down to 286, 277 for the buyers. And yeah, it's hard for me to say what I expect here, because I do think that basically the expansion itself can still be a little bit of an unknown factor on what will happen for advanced moon materials. But at the moment, slight recovery in a lot of them, but pressure is clearly still there from a lot of supply. Take two ships next, coming in at 37.35. Like that. Yeah, let's just go through the list and see if we can spot any trends or new trends, especially that, of course. So the Basilisk still stuck in that 100 to 130 million range. There is really not much to say here. 120 to 106. If you want a cheap Basilisk, you're buying just above 100 million, which is pretty much the lowest range you've been able to get for the entire year. You can definitely put up a buy order at the moment. Cerberus then actually diving down to 1-year low point. So if you're looking for that cheapest Cerberus, which I already have a couple, I think, 126 to 117, you're buying a Cerberus below 120 million, I think, at this point. Although right now that daily average unfortunately just crossing the 5-day moving average, so I think we're just a couple days late for the best opportunity here, but still clearly 1 year low range and a cheap Cerberus. If you want one, you can grab it right now. The curse, after spiking back up to 150, you can see that that pressure is continuously mounting and that the buyers are already back below 130. 139 now to 120 for the buyers. So once again, you want a cheap curse, you can still buy one right now. Damnation also, buyers back below 250 by quite a bit. 253 to 239. Yeah, the demand just isn't there for those Take 2 ships at the moment. The Deacon, very unusual as well, right? Massive volume spike on one day, a couple days ago for the trading. And what does the chart do? Just completely shrugs that off, and those buyers are dropping off even more for the Deacon. 17 million to 14 million. That's really unusual, showing that it's actually a pretty dead market at the moment, probably because it's just really cheap to make, and as a result you get this massive amount of ships that's there, too much for the current activity in the game. Next we get the Eagle, super stuck here as well at the lowest end of the range, so you want a cheap Eagle or a couple of them. Definitely look at that now, 118 to 113, so probably like a 115 or something could be something to try. You're absolutely getting them below 120 million. Last year 200 million for an Eagle was easily possible. EOS, same story, did a bit of a bump, but the pressure is just absolutely relentless. 235 to 226. I bought my EOS at like 254, so you can definitely get a good deal here now. The Ares, a little bit different, back up above 40 million ISK. I would actually call this an expensive chart for a Take 2 ship at the moment. So if you bought at the absolute lowest point, below 30 million, you can actually try and take some profits right now. But I'd say be fast or be very patient, because I personally do think that pressure will be right back and we'll get to that 30 to 40 million range easily. Flycatcher also going up a little bit here. After going below 40 million, that does seem to be a trigger for investors to come in, pushing sell price up to 45 million, but the buyers are just not budging. They're still at 38 million as well for the Flycatcher. It's just harder on this side of the chart to grab a buy order than it is on this side of the chart here. Next here we've got the Guardian, seeing pressure again, probably buyers close to 100 million. Yep, 102 to 110, so super cheap. Heretic taking off a little bit, but same story, from close to 1 year low price point, so you're just too late to grab your Heretics for close to 30 million. 35 for the sellers, it's still not that much. Then the Hound, which had this tradable spike here up to 25 million, is now landing, and you can see that here as well. Those minimum prices are starting to pull down as well. With you know, trying to get back to that 15 million. I personally would wait until buyers go below 15 million before I try a buy order myself, but 17 to 16 million, very narrow margin. And just look at that 20, 17, 60, 40, 24, really showcasing that it's an oversupply situation for Take 2 that's creating these cheap prices. And I personally, again, I'm still in that mode of I need that very clear 1 year low point or super low range for the buy orders. Be on the right side of the charts, try to grab a couple of cheap ones, but be very patient with that. And I actually have plans for most of them to fly them myself. Ikitursa back below 500 million as well. Our Ishtar doing a little bit better for the last couple of weeks, except here at the tail end. Of course, you can see how that daily average is dropping off very sharply. Buyers still, no, buyers just dropped off. So this this still needs to catch up, but basically sellers are just above the 130 mark, and then buyers have all of a sudden vanished to a 127, going to a 122 pretty quickly. Keep an eye on the Ishtar if you still want or need one. on the cheap. Next couple of days could definitely be there. Then we've got our Kirin, small logistics frigate, slightly better with another tradable spike here in mid-October, went up to 30 million ISK, and you could have bought these below 15 million, still in the expensive range at the moment. 23 million to 20 million, so again we need a bit of patience on this one. Manticore starting to drop off. Again, I'd love to see 15 million come into play. It's going to be a little bit harder for the Manticore to do. Very narrow margin, right side of the chart, so an aggressive buy order here. Close to that 17 million, I think, can get you a cheap Manticore. The Nemesis is back below 15 million, slightly going up. So again, here we're just too late to pick up the cheapest Nemesis, but we're still below 15 on both sellers and buyers. So I would say if you want a couple of extra stealth bombers, which I actually bought an extra stealth bomber myself for the event in Turner, so I went in a Nemesis, then you can build up your reserves right now. The Nighthawk going up on the average price. So here again, slightly on the average for the sellers, but you see how those buyers are very, very reluctant. That minimum price is only now edging above 250 million on over a week of upwards pressure from the sellers. 283 to 254 million. Slight sell opportunity basically for the Nighthawk, if you want to call it that. I'd love to see a larger percentage drop before doing that, but I personally again think that now there will be players out there desperate enough to take advantage of even these prices, and you can see how those minimum prices hardly moved, so any pressure here can bring those buyers right back well below 250. On the Oneros chart, we are looking, like we're away from on Oneros well below 100 million ISK, but not by that much. 110 to 101 for the buyers. Next here is the Purifier, and that's actually a little bit more of the risk, but which is also the good news, of course, for Tech 2. It is another stealth bomber, of course, so here you do have below 15 million or at 15 million for the buying, sell at 25, sell well above 20, right? Try to grab this part here, but then of course the overreaction is happening right now, and we are going straight down to 15 million. So sellers are desperate, 50 at 15.5 million, buyers are still at 15.2. If we can push through that, it's a lot, it's 50 plus ships, but then you could again buy a Purifier below 15 million. That would be a no-brainer, but even now, right, you can buy a Purifier very close to 15 million, and you can see the potential spikes here still do exist up to 25 million for the Purifier. The Rook then slightly more spread and on the wrong side of the chart to say this is the time to buy. The Saber, same story, right? Slight uptick here, but nothing too great. So basically you're a little bit too late for the cheapest Sabers. Scalpels starting to come back down significantly. We'd love to see 10 million on the buyers. That's still at 11.5, so still a bit early for me there, but definitely on the cheap side. Scimitar, logistics cruiser, buy order just above 100 million, and you've got one, so that's still very, very much doable. And then our Sleipnir is actually a first larger ship where we're seeing a real bit of rebound in price. So you could have probably bought these, let's see if we can get something showing here, 230 at the very best, but 240 over the last couple of months. You easily grabbed a Sleipnir for that price, and now they're selling for 345, buyers coming in at 274. So that's definitely a sell opportunity in a battle cruiser. Not exactly what I personally would have expected to see happen, but a slight first little sign that maybe volatility could be back in the works. We do then need to also see a turnaround, in my opinion, in advanced moon materials, and I'm not sure that that's going to happen. Vagabond 150, not that much to say. And finally the Zarmast, up a little bit, slightly more volumes as well. There does seem to be interest in flying Triglavian ships. They are of course very cool and powerful. 473 to 422 though, buyers still very wary to push too high too quickly. So for Tech 2, slightly more trade to be seen here with our first command ship actually doing a tradable spike. Stealth bombers still, you know, doing that volatility. So the smaller the ship, the more likely it is. But yeah, again, for me, the big unknown is now what's happening in the weeks following the expansion. Let's take another look at Tech Tree as well. Next, 4820. Don't expect too much here, of course. Here are the destroyers, so slight uptick in the confessor, bumping into 50 million for the high range of the price, 49 to 44 million. Bit of a spread, but honestly, all of this is just too stable, too narrow. I don't see the trade potential in these destroyers at the moment. Hecate, that's about as flat as it gets, landing on 50 million. 51 for the sellers, 49 for the buyers. Quite a bit of supply here, so that's maybe worrying, but the problem is that quite a bit of supply is not really moving volatility. Then we've got the Jackdaw that is also landing on 50 million. It's got a bit more of a spread to it on a couple of days, but now 51 million to 47 million is not that much. Again, that's not new supply, so it basically shows that this is just an anemic market. Volumes aren't moving, and even though we are seeing a decent amount of ships available on the market, there just isn't enough demand to cause any serious volatility. And then even our Zwepel, no, the Zwepel actually moved back below 50 million, retaking its place as the cheaper option and the least popular one, unfortunately, as well. Of course, 49 to 46 million, not exactly a big margin. And all that really happened is basically sellers got a little bit of breathing room here, going above 50 million. Too good to be true. Took a while for supplies to move. Again, it is a tiny, slow market, but eventually sellers said, all right, well, I got a Zwepel, and they just closed that margin, and then we're probably back into this same story as here. Very narrow margin between sellers and buyers, very low volumes. Just stuff is not moving in the tactical destroyer market. For the cruiser market, stuff was a little bit different. Here's the Legion, for instance, all right, climbing back to the highest point of the last 2 months. Not that great, but we also had this very sharp drop off where you could have bought a Legion for close to 150 million. You're selling at 183, a small trade to be had here, I think, but definitely a healthier spread and healthier volumes on the Legion. If you're looking to trade in Tech Tree, I think these hulls are the best place. Loki then making its way back to 200 million, look at that, and then just a month ago, and I think called this one a buy opportunity, 170, maybe even 165 on the Loki has been possible and called on Eve Talk, 196 for the sellers, so here we get a 30 million potential profit that can be made. 180 for the buyers as well, pushed up a little bit, so that spread already re-increasing. So if just a couple of days, you could have probably really had your nice sell order and a good chance to trigger it. We are starting to turn the corner already, but this is far better, bit more volume, better volatility. The Proteus is probably the least popular one from my perspective, although it's making its way to 200 million on some volumes here as well. 201 for the sellers, 173 for the buyers. That lags behind a little bit, but yeah, a Proteus sell opportunity is actually on the books right now. And then the Tengu, we saw that last week, very nice breakout, went up to 250 million, loses a bit of ground from that, but also 210 million for the sellers, 191 for the buyers. So if a month ago, and I think we definitely called this one here, 150, 160, absolutely possible to have a Tengu lying around while following Eve Talk that costs you that much, and you're still selling it at a 200 plus million. Tech Tree cruisers, that was the somewhat more predictable play with a better chance of volatility. And so Legion, you could take some profits on that one. Loki, you can take some profits on that one. Tengu, still possible as well. And then to my surprise, even the Proteus has a small edge at the moment. So very cool to see. I hope some of you guys took advantage of some of those low points that we called for those cruisers. But yeah, don't, in my opinion, don't jump on these tactical destroyers. That's not where the action is. It is the cruisers at the moment. And then finally, we've got the extra product for the week. It's going to be faction battleships 52-55. like that. And the reason is I want to sort of see, I'm kind of expecting that some materials and things like that for these faction battleships might be needed in the faction dreadnoughts as well, to see if there is something like that happening where production is being held off because of preparations for the expansion. So battleships, faction battleships, probably not in the pirate battleships, but those were always very expensive. Let's see what's happening here. The Bargus still above 1.25 billion, so very, very expensive. A little bit less so over the last 2-3 weeks. 1.3 billion though for the sellers. That's a lot. Macariel doing another spike here as well, almost went to 1 billion ISK. Here, super expensive, and at 820 million to 770. I mean, it's not bargain expensive, but it is very expensive. Then here we've got the Nestor, actually going back to a more average price. But average for a Nestor is 1.2 to 1.1 billion. Then we've got the Nightmare, that's actually been a little bit more inexpensive on the chart. Is actually now breaking out to a price above 1 billion as well. 1.1 billion to 1 billion. I personally think that this will have something to do with shifts in nullsec, where the amount of ratting that will then yield these BPCs, for instance, and maybe some materials will be impacted by some stuff happening in nullsec. So the Nightmare going up in price should actually mean that there's maybe some action happening somewhere in nullsec. Then we've got the Balgorn, very expensive on the chart as well, almost 1 billion ISK for a Balgorn. And then our PvE King Rattlesnake, 1.3 billion almost for the sellers, 1.1 for the buyers, also very, very expensive. And then finally the Vindicator, well, a little bit better on the chart, but that's relative, of course, at 1.4 billion. It is also super, super expensive. So our pirate faction battleships are extremely expensive at the moment. Even the cheaper ones, or especially the cheaper ones, I should say, are starting to show signs that they are pushing up above 1 billion. That could be because, well, people are expecting some of the materials needed for the production here, which I think I can go here for that. So you get some of that stuff here, some of these components, that there will be increased demand for, if not the components themselves, maybe the underlying layers, because of the faction dreadnoughts that are coming. If that's true, then I personally would expect a bit of a move up as well in these Navy faction battleships, and at least the Thunderchild, that's not tied to LP and thus to the faction warfare situation between the empires, is more expensive all of a sudden, since basically the announcements, and now we know what's coming a little bit more for the expansion. It's still actually a little bit more affordable than most of those pirate faction ships at 870 million, 815 for the buyers. But clearly here it does feel like a slight change in dynamic. Apocalypse Navy issue taking off right now, so this could be an Amar Minmatar situation, right? If Minmatar wins out, LP becomes more expensive, but it could also be because of expectations in production costs. Let's actually maybe take a quick look at that. If we go take a look at this one, yeah, also requires these components, maybe a little bit less of it, 650 to 500 million. Armageddon Navy issue, oof, that's expensive, shooting up to 1-year high point as well, 805 to 600 million for the buyers. They're still stuck in the past a little bit. Big spread of 200 million, but the push-up is here, very visible. Dominic's Navy issue, also 1-year high point. Dominic's Navy issue, 1.3 billion ISK on no supply. This is basically the perfect storm, I think. The Galente faction is clearly being crushed by Caldari. We see that from the races, which I didn't take a look at, but maybe a good opportunity if I can get them. There we go, the faction campaigns. How are we doing? Stargate construction, we're edging to 50%. I'm not sure how much time there's left here, but that clearly shows Caldari's dominating faction warfare compared to Galente. And then as a result, we've got super expensive loyalty points for Galente, for the Dominic's Navy issue. And then now, of course, you've got the entire market holding their breath, probably prepping and stockpiling for the dreadnoughts coming in, and then you get something like this, where a Dominic's Navy issue that's normally 500 to 750 million ISK, well, a lot less expensive than a pirate faction ship, is all of a sudden in pirate faction ship price range. Megatron Navy issue should see something slightly similar. Well, alright, the volumes are even worse than the Dominic's Navy issue, 840 to 637, but also very expensive compared to just a month ago. Raven Navy issue, a little bit better, right? More stable. Why? That's probably the LP aspect of it. They are still very cheap, but again, that trend is just while Caldari are dominating their faction warfare space and have plenty of LP supply, their Raven Navy issue is at the high end of the trade range, which is 600 million ISK. So if you're looking for a cheaper faction battleship right now, I would take a look at Raven Navy issue. Scorpion Navy issue also going to the highest end of the trade range despite winning faction warfare. And then here we do have a slight bit of a counter move, I feel. Typhoon Fleet issue staying stable and even some downwards pressure at the tail end. Tempest Fleet issue actually also spiking, but then going back down to 600 million. So clearly in Minmatar, Amar faction warfare, you've got a bit more competition, you get more opportunity for one side to start to win out against another, more LP volatility. And so this is why all of a sudden Armageddon Navy issue, for instance, does this, because I think it gets buffed or something else gets nerfed that makes this one super interesting. I'm not sure, but on top of that, they're probably having a little bit more trouble with their loyalty point supplies, and then you've got the production cost story on top of that, creating a jump from below 500 million, super cheap, everything is fine, to 800 million, very pronounced 1-year high point, and even over 900 million on a day. So very interesting situation there, but again, I do think that there is a bit of prep for the expansion and things that are coming there that is heavily influencing these markets as well. So we're gonna go into the unknown, and we'll see next week what happens when the expansion should drop. That's going to be it for this EVE Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, I'll see you next time.